Oh, hell yes. You know how sometimes you can feel like you're waiting so long for something to arrive, and then when it actually does, it feels like time moved really, really quickly? Well, that's how I feel about today's patch. Today's patch was huge, guys. There were significant changes to PvE. There were significant changes to, well, maybe not super significant, but there were changes to PvP, World versus World, and the third and final wing of the first Guild Wars 2 raid, which is now complete. We have a full raid. The Forsaken Thicket has now been dropped into the game. Wing 3 is live. I have jumped in there. I have had a taste of it. I want to talk in general terms about that taste of it and what my experience of this wing's been, because it's been kind of different to the other wings I've played. Now, there's not going to be any story spoilers at all in this video. There will be slight mechanical spoilers for the very start of the raid, but really nothing major. But I thought I'd throw that warning out for you guys anyway. Not only this, though, by the way, on top of all that I just mentioned, this patch also has another current events change. We're finally here, even if it's very minor, we're finally here where a patch has gone out for Guild Wars 2, where yes, there has been raiding content for this, smaller portion of the community, but there's actually been something for everyone else too, in World versus World PvP and general PvE as it stands. So I will be doing videos covering all of that juicy stuff. You get a couple of mails, one relating to the raids, one relating to the current events, but let's focus on that new wing for now. Now, this is significant in a great many ways. The first reason is because, of course, this does conclude the story, and I say that that's significant because, as we speculated in an earlier video this week, concluding the story in this wing might mean we move away from this story entirely. Really, the cards are in the air right now. We don't know how they're going to land. ArenaNet could choose to do the next raid, continuing this kind of White Mantle Messart-based story even further, or they may go for an entirely different concept in a different geographical location of Tyria and leave that Messart story on hold for a time they want to pick it up elsewhere in a bigger way. Again, there's been a lot of debate, especially when new wings come out, but especially this wing because it concludes the story, as to how much this is going to affect Living World. I feel a little bit bad for ArenaNet. There's a lot of misquotation going on. A long time ago, as far as I understand, perhaps people in the comments can give me something very specific so we're all on the same page, but as far as I understand, a long time ago, ArenaNet said that the raid story would not be required to understand Living World Season 3. They didn't say there would be absolutely no crossover whatsoever. Yet this seems to be the quote that's getting thrown around a lot recently. Maybe there is a contemporary comment from the devs I've just never seen where they say such a thing. But that question of, oh god, do I as a casual player need to be able to do this raid to understand the really big content coming up, the new Living World, is on everyone's mind. For me, so far, based on what I understand the devs have said, I wouldn't worry too much, but then there's going to be some bias there. I can see it because, hey, I've actually played the raid, so I'm not too worried. Definitely is kind of surprising to look at this year now. I was mentioning in the comments with you guys on the last video, it's pretty much been, as it seems, about a year between Heart of Thorn's release and the release of Living World. You dial the clock back 12 months before now, and you will have heard me talking about how important it is that they roll it out really fast. And it does seem crazy that not only did Heart of Thorns come out and have no further content at all except the raids, but we've got an entire raid, 3 separate massive wings dropped in before any of the core narrative has gone forward at all. Minus these small current events things, but I do think they're a little bit too small for people to wholeheartedly say they're big continuations of the story so far. So that is interesting. I do think that we'll get Living World Season 3 before the next raid starts, but that would be totally bonkers, wouldn't it? We'll start on the next raid before it even begins, and we've still had no word at all, no trailers, no dev comments, no actual date as to when they're thinking about bringing the Living World back. In some ways, that might be a good thing. I'll just wrap this conversation up by pointing out the longer they take on it, the more hopefully we'll get in those individual updates. It's very easy to put on your rose-tinted glasses and look back at Season 2 and say, oh, the 2 weekly updates were great. But if you really go back and look at it, they never maintained the 2 weekly updates very well at all when we were in Season 2. And a lot of those patches still fell very short. Specifically, right towards the end of Season 2, we got like 2 missions, and that was it. And then we had to wait another 2 weeks. It didn't feel too good. I think they're trying to avoid that with Season 3, and that might be why we've had a longer wait. But I think there's no denying that it's been quite damaging it's taken this long. So, back to why this wing specifically is more exciting to people than perhaps the other wings is more significant. Well, it's actually about where it takes us in range of geographically on the map. You guys, a long time ago, even before Wing 1 came out, I was talking about how this raid will probably almost guaranteed feature the Bloodstone, a giant chunk of rock that was in the Maguma jungle we visited during a mission in Guild Wars 1 and was just out of reach in Guild Wars 2, slightly to the side of one of the guild halls in seemingly a really odd location. This wing, when you go in game, you can see that it seems to lead us directly to where this location was finally. This was something many of us were expecting even in base Heart of Thorns, and could say a lot for the story. In fact, when you first load into this raid, there's already a lot of like sum up information from the NPCs as the devs try to get you back on track of what's going on in the story, and they focus a lot on the Bloodstone. I still have no idea in the wing whether that really is going to be a big feature of the story, but it seems likely that the fourth and final encounter will probably have something to do with that. Not just this, I will point out something even cooler, and this came left field for me, and as a really long-term fan of the franchise, this is sort of a sleeper hit. So, if you guys take a look at the Guild Wars 1 world map here with me, I used to take great joy when I first got into this franchise, speculating about all these areas of the map that had been painted onto this world map, but we couldn't travel to at all. That's why updates like the Sorrow's Furnace update that added Grant's footprint and expanded the boundaries of the map back in Guild Wars 1 were so exciting. And this has been something that's been prevalent through the entirety of the franchise. I felt the same when I got to Cantha and looked at areas of the city that I wanted to go. I felt the same when I got to Nightfall and there were areas of Beyond Vabi that I wanted to travel to. Nightfall really covered a lot more of its in-game map than the other continents did, and especially when Eye of the North came out and basically doubled the size of the map without doubling the playable terrain, added all these crazy areas that we still to this day look at in Guild Wars 2, I've always felt this way. Now, the main thing though, going way back to 2005, the release of Guild Wars 1, the main geographic feature that I was always excited to travel to was a specific basin of water north of the Maguma jungle. Now, we kind of had some lore in Guild Wars 1 in the early days talking about some basins of water to the north, but these were more related to the two large lakes north of Crater at the time, which are really sort of harder to see in Guild Wars 2, and they were collectively known as the Giants Basin. You had the Greater Giants Basin and the Lesser Giants Basin, but the one that intrigued me even beyond the Giants Basin, and this beautiful idea of swimming around in them, something that I was really excited to do in Guild Wars 2, by the way, and sort of got a weeny little taste of with the original implementation of Cordicus's Manor, the dungeon. The one that was even more exciting and even more remote was this one north of the Maguma jungle. Oh, the day where we could travel there, I thought. And especially in Guild Wars 2, where swimming and underwater combat is such a big thing, how exciting will this be? And it's been there in the back of my mind, resting. Fast forward to today, I start this raid off, I play not even very far in it, I find a giant hole, I jump down it, and I find myself swimming in a large body of water. And I'm wondering, this is really weird, this is odd for this to be here. Open up the world map and lo and behold, I haven't even realized it, but I've moved so far into this new area that I'm in said body of water, swimming around. There's a little bit of story in there. You can't go super deep out there, and there's definitely space for a proper map to be featured there at some point. But this was such a significant moment for me to realize that finally Guild Wars was in a place as a franchise where it was finally expanding to these locations on the world map that I'd wanted to go to for so long. It's probably been the sleeper hit of the entire experience so far. And I'll definitely have a video talking about all the little bits of story and extra areas you can explore and how well the wing feels to roam around in very shortly, because this is a bit more open and it's a bit more like how they did Wing 2. In general, it's been great every time a new wing comes out, because it really does feel like I've got a new area to travel through. And again, I cannot stress this enough, and it always flares up so much in my mind when I'm first playing through a raid and encountering for the first time the way they tell the story and the way you feel exploring these maps with a real sense of progression, and how the story and the environment ties beautifully together as you travel along these paths in the Maguma jungle is incredible. And it is the best exploration, the most rewarding exploration, the best sense of feeling like your interior and understanding your place in the world and your purpose of being there than I have ever had in all of Guild Wars 2. And you guys shouldn't miss out on it just because you're scared that the content's a little bit difficult. I promise you, it's definitely worth trying to experience, especially if you like the old Guild Wars 1 campaign mission format, because it's kind of just like those, except a little bit longer and much harder. Another thing as well, back to why is this update significant? Legendary armor. The legendary armor we were told was coming in. It was one of these marketed things for Heart of Thorns. It was a specific reward for people who were engaging in the raiding gameplay, and really it's the raiders, I would say, who get the most benefit out of the legendary armor, though World vs. Worlders may have a thing to say to me about that as well. So the way that they've worked this out is you start off with a collection, and you have to complete this collection to start building your precursor armor and eventually get the legendary armor. But that collection, you have to play all 3 wings to finish, and today is when the final wing has actually been released into the game for the Envoy armor. So up until now, everyone's been stalled because there's only been so far every time they've dropped a wing in that you could push these achievements. Well, now you can complete the entire first tier of the achievement, get your precursor armor or your original stuff, and then do the second collection in theory, or keep pushing. I'm not quite sure where the boundaries of that go right now. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some other gates stopping people getting all the way up to legendary armor right now, but there is a lot more progress people can make on this, and that's like the primary reward of the raids. That is one of the things that people got most excited about, even though they've proved, in my opinion, to be very rewarding in a great many other ways if you get good at them. The legendary armor is now actually a thing, and you can continue along. And also, I'll note that the legendary armor collections aren't just exciting because, hey, legendary armor. They're kind of exciting because they have a weird story associated with them too. You know how the new precursor scavenger hunts have all got interesting stories associated with them, that you learn a little bit more about the weapon? Well, the Envoy armor's connection to the Spirit Veil and Forsaken Thicket in general is really interesting, and I want to continue that collection just to see whether that unfolds into something more, whether things like the Spirit Quest Tonic end up having more value or more purpose, and that's all basically been unlocked here, so it's pretty big stuff. So, I kind of want to close this video out by talking a little bit about pugging raids, and this is for a couple of reasons. One, because of my experience of the people I've gone in on this wing with, as opposed to the previous 2 wings, is much more puggable in my opinion, but also because the wing itself eases you into raiding better than any other wing has in the past. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you have a look at the original wing to have released, they gave you, for experienced raiders, a fairly comfortable, easy encounter, but for people who are just getting into raiding, quite a difficult fight in the way of the Veil Guard. I specifically remember when that wing released, after me and my friends had played a lot of it in the betas and stuff, we'd enjoyed ourselves, we got through that encounter quite quickly. And pushed through to the Gorseval fight, and that's where we got stuck. But for the first many hours, hundreds and hundreds of groups were all stuck on the first encounter, the Veil Guard. And this is kind of a big brick wall that slaps a lot of people in the face, and they decide that they don't have the time or the energy to get through the raiding. And then Wing 2 felt very similar as well. Wing 2 didn't ease you in with one of its easier encounters like the Spirit Wall encounter in Wing 1 or the Bandit encampment. Instead, it throws another brick wall at you right at the start with the Slothazaur fight. If you started trying to raid with Wing 2, and you went in there, you basically had one corridor and a couple of notes you could read until you got slammed by this incredibly difficult boss that my group stalled on for a long time on our first time. And again, I think this would have put a lot of people off. Wing 3, the devs have been a little bit smarter, in my opinion, in that the first encounter that you experience in Wing 3 is not immediately a brick wall boss. It's actually something that not only is difficulty tuned to be much easier than most of the raiding stuff, but also, while you'll have failures on it, you are physically moving through the environment, and so you really feel that a sense of progression and getting further and further every time you do fail. It's a fun encounter because you will clear it fairly quickly, even if you've never raided before. And even if you're struggling on it, you really do feel like you're getting better and better because you are physically so capable of seeing what you're trying to do. So the encounter feels a lot, I'll just explain it to people, like the Frostgate mission from Guild Wars 1 Prophecies, in that you kind of split in two. This is something I wanted to see the devs play with a lot, by the way, split mechanics. You kind of split your party in two, and the main bulk of your party is going to try and escort an NPC up a long pathway where continuous infinite mob groups are charging at you. And in the meantime, the other part of your raid group are sort of weaving in and out and climbing on some White Mantle fortifications to disable turrets that are harassing the NPC and your other friends down below. So you're kind of supporting them as they push up. It's kind of like a tower defense style thing, and you're climbing this long road. And so, like I say, if you fail, it's like, oh, well, don't worry, guys, we got a bit further, and then we got a bit further, and we got a bit further, and it's a great sense of accomplishment even when you have those losses coming in. And most importantly, perhaps to many, this encounter doesn't have any sense of a soft or a hard enrage. at all. Your incentive for doing this one fast is that probably over time, this is the first encounter of the wing, so you want to do it fast to get to the rest of the wing quicker in subsequent runs, and there's an achievement for some added incentive. But for those original players, those basic people just starting raiding, this is perfect. There is no crazy pressure. If you took an hour to get through this one encounter because you were playing ultra conservatively, then that's fine. The devs aren't like putting a hard or a soft enrage on there whatsoever, any sense of one. And so yeah, it's pretty comfortable. It's a pretty nice starting one, and I do think it's quite a puggable raid. And I think that's sort of what I did today. I really haven't tried the raid for any length of period of time. I've not viewed it in the same way as I had any of the other wings. I'll give it a real shot at some point in the future. But I did nip in there, did cobble together a few players, and I would have a little bit of advice for those of you who are trying to pug once you're actually in there. Because I think what a lot of the community tends to do when they're trying to get people involved in raiding and try and say, hey, try and pug it, try and pug it, try and pug it, they give a lot of advice about using LFG. And, oh, here's how you get into groups. I actually think the problem isn't about getting into groups. I think it's the problem the way that pugs treat one another once you are in the raid, when you start struggling. And so, what do I mean by this? Well, the number one thing that hurts pug groups, as far as I can see in raiding, and this is quite an important thing to identify, is when you are pugging it, you've got 10 almost strangers bundled in together, likely from varying time zones, and people are less invested in the progress of the group as a whole and much more willing to quit than if it was a dedicated guild group. If I was playing with a select few people that I know very well, we would all have that. We'd all be super nerds that all have no lives and are all super dedicated, that we could play hours and hours and hours on end and really get to grips with the mechanics. So as everybody learns it, you will learn it together, and you have that solid block of knowledge as a collective pushing through, and everybody's happy. But that doesn't happen with pugs, because with pugs, you're going to find about 40 minutes in, after a few wipes, someone's going to say, sorry guys, I've got to leave. And they can be perfectly within their rights to do that. It could be super late at night for them. They may have work to go to. They may have whatever kind of obligations that you didn't know about before because you were strangers until a few hours ago. But nonetheless, your group is now faced with replacing that person. The problem isn't finding a body to replace them, but the problem is now you have 9 people who know what they're doing, and one guy, especially when the wing's just released, who doesn't know anything and needs to be brought up to scratch. And what I have found kills pugs is that constant, oh, we have to explain it to this guy now. Oh, we have to explain it all again now. Oh, we have to explain it all again now. Oh, we have to explain it all again now. And it fatigues people. It tires them out. If you guys want your pugs to last longer, if you want to feel that you're still getting that big sense of progression, even as a collective, even though people are ducking in and out continuously, which is the main issue, I would seriously recommend people take it in turns, teaching the newcomers what you've already learned. Otherwise, you're going to have one individual person who eventually is giving crappy explanations, short explanations, and just losing patience. So that's thing number 1. But thing number 2 as well, when you find yourself in this situation, I cannot stress this enough. When you've got a new guy who comes in and you know a shit ton about the encounter, do not, for the love of God, waste 10 to 15 minutes standing there throwing a brick wall of information at this poor new guy who just joined your group. None of it really is going to get through. I've sat there with the experience of somebody's just come into our pug oh so many times at this point, and the poor person's just been bought and bombarded with this information, this information, this information, this information, with no perspective as to how the fight actually works and no real experience. I can guarantee you that only a small scrap of what has been thrown at them is eventually going to sink in. It's just a huge amount of wasted time. You do not have to go through that entire explanation every time. What you should do if you are that pug that's just come in is just say, hey, can we just do a couple of fights? I know we'll probably fail them, and I'm sorry about that, but it will give me a much better learning experience probably, and then once I come out of those fights, I can ask you specific questions about specific things I don't understand. People need that perspective. It doesn't work to just blast them with info and then expect them to be up to snuff just like the rest of you 9 people are, because you had a lot longer to let that sink in. So hopefully that's enough to help people get some real progress with their pugs. I'll be back with a great deal of videos over the coming weeks now, guys, diving into this wing in much more detail. We never did a Matthias wing fight in the previous wing because I wasn't particularly inspired about that one, but doing some guides on this may be right the best thing for us to do. So do check that out. I'll talk about the current events and all that kind of stuff too. Please, if you want to talk about your experiences in the raid and big mechanical spoilers and stuff, do preface them if you're going to do that in the comments, but I'd love to have some chats with you guys. I'm an open book. I'd love to see what people have found out. And until next time, everyone, thanks so much. I'm going to get straight back in there because it almost felt horrible making this video because I want to be in there. I want to be playing it constantly. And I'll be back tomorrow to tell you how things have been going. So cheers all. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time. Weapon skins, the Dominator weapon skin set. This is kind of funny. I guess there are some people out there who a new raid wing comes out and they're going to see that there's all these really cool new weapons and gear and skins in the raid wing, but at the same time they can't raid.